Wow, did you know that, this is unrelated, but did you know that Shark Boy and Lava Girl was just added to HBO?
Really?
Yeah, like my little HBO email that was popped up said, look at this family favorite. Shark Boy and Lava Girl.
Watch a movie made by Robert Rodriguez.
Yeah. Hey, there's a Four Rooms connection there, so.
I know. Yeah, our only Four Rooms connection in this movie. Anyways.
Is me reading an email. Okay. You ready?
1, 2, 3, hit it, boys! Wow!
So get together, have a few laughs.
Uh-oh, shit, lady, do I sound like I'm ordering a pizza?
Hey, put the freaking gun down on the ground right now. Take your shot across the freaking street and say that Billy's gonna get you.
Hello, and welcome to Where There's a Willis, There's a Way, a film podcast about the multitude of works by Bruce Willis. My name is Kendrick Martin.
And I'm Josh Carter. Today we'll be covering The Siege, directed by Edward Zwick, written by Lawrence Wright, Menno Meyjes, and Edward Zwick. If this is your first time listening to this podcast, what we're going to do is an in-depth breakdown of a movie that stars Bruce Willis. We'll talk about it both from a film perspective and his individual contribution. We'll add the movie to our rankings, talk trivia, do the Wheel of Willis, and then have a tasty little treat at the end.
That's where the treats go, is at the end.
Yep.
You can find all of our previous episodes over at williswaypod.com. You can find other podcasts in the Last of the Action Heroes podcast network over at lastoftheactionheroes.com. Check out all their stuff for similar action hero movie podcasts. There's a lot of great stuff over there. If you want to support this podcast, the number one thing you can do is rate and review us on iTunes, and then tell everyone else you know to rate and review us on iTunes. I was thinking today that it's actually kind of difficult to find us on iTunes if you're not an iTunes user. So on our Twitter page, we have a link tree, and I updated the link tree to include a direct link to our Apple Podcasts page.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, we need people to be able to find us that way because that's like the only podcast platform where you can leave reviews.
I know.
So,
That's bananas. That seems to be the way things work.
Yep. That is bananas. So before we jump into discussing this movie, what we are going to give you guys an idea about is kind of a little picture, if you will, as far as if we think this movie is worth watching or not. And Kendrick and I spent a lot of time researching in different libraries and on the internet, just tippity-tappity typing away. And finally, we decided that no other ranking system was going to do for us. And so we came up with our own fully patented 100%, right, Kendrick?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Fully patented rating system called the Willis Way rating system. And for those of you that don't know, this is basically where we rate a movie out of a Bruce Willis.
The reason we do this is because if you are listening to this podcast, some of these movies you may have never heard of. And you're like, oh, shoot, I want to keep following along with the boys because I don't want to get spoiled by their great hot takes. And we're here to say that not all these movies are worth watching. So, Josh, why don't you explain the science behind our method?
Ooh, yes, the science. So we rate movies a full Bruce Willis if not only do we think it's an amazing movie that's worth watching, but it's also does great things with this Bruce Willis person and puts them in interesting places and stuff like that. However, anything that gets below that is varying levels of recommendation. So if we give something at least a Bruce, it means that we would recommend that you watch it. And then if we give it like a Bruce W, it's like, yeah, we recommend that you watch it. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. And then every more additional letters after that are kind of a bigger endorsement for a film. And then everything that's below a Bruce, we typically don't recommend that you seek out and watch. But the really bad movies will get lower letters than the movies that are maybe slightly better, but still not worth your time.
Yeah, so it may not be downright offensive, but it might not just be worth your time. So that's why the whole word Bruce there gives us a lot of room to play.
Yes, for sure. For sure. So, Kendrick.
Yes, Joshua.
We're both futzing around. I'm futzing around because I don't know exactly what letters I'm going to give this movie. And
I've gone back and forth.
I'm a little
myself.
torn.
I think this movie is interesting to talk about, but I don't know if I can recommend it for people to watch.
Yeah.
Which I suppose is what makes this podcast great. But also, if it's interesting to talk about, some people out there might consider it interesting to watch. So you got to settle on something.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Yeah, I think that I'm going to give this movie a Bruce space. So, wait, is that worth watching or is that not worth watching? I can't remember where the space comes in. Okay, I'm going to give this movie a Bruce then. So I'm going to say it's just shy of earning on its own merit the worthiness to be watched.
Gotcha. Adding the space really throws off our calculations.
It really does.
We may need to return to the patent office and update our notes on how that works. I was going to say a Bruck, so a BRUC. Similar thought. This movie has some interesting stuff to talk about, like I said, but a lot of problems. So,
yeah,
it'll be fun to talk about.
For sure.
In the meantime, if you want to get a hold of us, you can send us an email, williswaypod@gmail.com. You can find us at the aforementioned Twitter page at williswaypod. Before we jump into the siege, we're going to take a quick break.
Hi, I'm James Sinjensmith from the Drunk Bond Podcast. I review the James Bond movies. And even though I'm very misinformed and possibly have a drinking problem, don't be afraid. Just give us a listen. And if you don't listen, then I'm simply going to scream.
Josh, before we talk about the siege, I wanted to call out, we didn't mention this last time, but the Armageddon was our 30th episode.
Oh, right. Congrats.
That was quite the momentous occasion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
It's wild to think that last December, when we were like, man, there are no good Bruce Willis podcasts in the world. I wonder who should start one. And then God said, "You two." That's the creation story. I don't know if you've read Genesis recently, but that's pretty much how
I haven't, so I'll just take your word for it.
Yeah, that's exactly word for word how the podcast inception started. Yeah, no, it's been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot, and I've really enjoyed talking about all these different things and hearing your perspective on stuff. And it's been fun, and I'm also extremely thankful to everybody that's listened along so far. Yeah,
you guys are fantastic, and
Absolutely.
I really appreciate you.
I've learned pitfalls with Audacity. I've learned how to patent a rating system. I've learned how to use Excel spreadsheets because Josh continually chides me on my inabilities.
Okay, look, I'm just saying, why are some of the cells formatted with 10 points and other ones 11? That's weird. It's weird.
Look, but it's just, how it is, man. You just put it in. You set it up.
Just live in the moment, man.
Yeah.
Don't let your Excel spreadsheets be a bunch of numbers, dude.
Yeah, dude. It's just fonts.
Yeah.
Let those fonts live. All right. Well, with all that ado, again, thank you to everyone who listened so far. Now we're going to start talking about the siege.
Hello, sir. It's Agent Hubbard, FBI. And what I propose is that you let these people go, and I'll take their place. I'm gonna take your silence to mean that you're considering my offer.
Oh, God.
London, Belfast, Beirut. We're not the first city to have to deal with terrorism. This is New York City. we can take it.
You don't understand. These guys are pros. From the age of 12, they've been dodging people like you.
The situation is appalling. They're attacking our way of life. The president wants it stopped, and there's only one way to do that.
Are you saying the president is prepared to take the necessary steps?
Today, with the invocation of the War Powers Act by the president, I am declaring a state of martial law in this city. We intend to seal off this borough, and we intend to squeeze it.
Do you have any idea what you're starting here?
It's wrong. What if what they really want is for us to herd children in the stadiums like we're doing? And put soldiers on the street and have Americans looking over their shoulders? Bend the law, shred the Constitution just a little bit. We do that, and everything that we have bled and fought and died for is over.
Don't you ever again question my command, is that clear?
I'm not under your command, General.
Take a look around, tell me if you really think that's true.
That audio was from the trailer of The Siege. I'm going to read the description from IMDb. The secret U.S. abduction of a suspected terrorist leads to a wave of terrorist attacks in New York City, which leads to the declaration of martial law. This movie stars Denzel Washington, Annette Bening, Tony Shalhoub, and of course, Bruce Willis. You can find this movie on VOD for rental, and we are going to be spoiling this whole plot as always. Joshua, tell me your thoughts on The Siege.
Yeah, I have so many thoughts on this movie. When it started out and it was just like the capture of whatever the dude's name is right at the beginning of the movie. I don't even know the movie. Well, there's probably some name. A sheik, yeah. So when it starts out with that and they're like, America says go, go, go. And then like Bruce Willis is like a general and he's seen at the beginning of the movie. I just wrote down in my notes, I was like, oh no, this movie's going to be exceedingly pro-America, isn't it? And in some ways, it is. It's fairly, like post-Reagan era Americana piece. It's not as strong as some of the other things we've watched. It's nowhere near like an Armageddon and stuff like that. And then on the other hand, it does do some condemnation of some pretty heinous things. Some things that hit a little bit close to home, even, I would say, are talked about in this movie. And so it's a little bit more complicated than that. And a lot of this movie is really, really, really complicated. There's some stuff that's in it that's good, and I am definitely going to talk a long time about that. And there's some other stuff in it that is very, very bad. We'll just get it right out of the way and say that this movie has a big problem with the way that it's written a lot of Arab Americans, and the way that it treats Muslims in particular is just in general is really bad. And they kind of try to like subvert some of those expectations, but in the end, there's a lot of mustache twirling villainry done by the Muslim characters that are in this movie. And I think that that's pretty bad. This movie was picketed right when it was released, and some of the writers think that that was one of the reasons why the movie didn't do as great right when it got released, which we'll talk about in a bit. But I think that the communities that did picket against this movie were right to do so, even though there are some things that I did really like about it.
I think that was very well said. I want to note a couple things. First of all, I don't remember if we said this, but this movie comes out in 1998. So several years prior to 9/11, which I think really changed the popular discourse on this subject. But it was
definitely
after, I think it was 92. There was an attempted bombing of the World Trade Center. And then there was obviously the 1996, I think it was, Oklahoma City bombing. Timothy McVeigh. So there had been terrorist attacks in recent history by the time this came out.
Yes.
It's obviously impossible to view this without looking at it through the lens of post 9/11. And there are a lot of people, there's a lot of like unsubstantiated. I didn't see where they got their data, but it was like pull quotes from the producers and stuff who said this was like the most rented movie in the months following 9/11. I think you're right in that it treats Arab people, not only Arab Americans, but Arab people in general, pretty dismally, and Islam pretty dismally, and it kind of wraps all those things up into kind of a generic, mysterious other that's never really talked about or nuanced, I guess. Roger Ebert has a great review on this. He gave it 2.5 stars. He had a lot of the similar thoughts that I think both of us are going to be bringing up. And he talks about how there's a comment in this movie where near the end of the movie, they basically start rounding up anybody of Arab descent, whether or not they're even an immigrant, just anyone of Arab descent, and placing them in cages, concentration camps. And I think you're definitely supposed to draw a parallel to what happened to the Japanese in World War II. And then we can draw parallels to what we've seen more recently with immigrants coming up from Mexico or other immigrant groups who have been kind of just grouped and placed into internment camps. But one of the things I liked here in this Roger Ebert review is he said, quote, "The movie tries to temper its material. They love this country as much as we do," one American says in the film, unaware of the irony in the they and we. And and then he also says a little bit further down, quote, "I'm not arguing The Siege is a deliberately offensive movie. It's not that brainy. It's in its clumsy way, it throws in comments now and then to show it knows the difference between Arab terrorists and American citizens." And that's end quote there. But I think it was the sloppy treatment is where the gray area of recommending this movie to be. It wants to kind of talk about how you can easily other people you don't know and the slippery slope of treating people terribly. And I think Denzel Washington has a line of, you know, if we destroy our own constitution, the enemy doesn't have to do it for us. I think that's where it wants to go. But then when it still just continues making faceless, you know, Arab terrorist groups the bad guy, it's like it can't make up its mind. It's either pro like democracy, and I think a better movie would have just had no terrorists, but instead it was all a plot by Bruce Willis in order to undermine some system and gain power. I think that would have been a better movie with a much more moving story. But like I said, I think the fact that this movie wants to have a conversation at this time, I think was a step in the right direction. And a lot of the pop culture that came out after 9/11 was 10 steps backward from this, where they didn't even want to acknowledge that at all. Yeah. So if we hadn't taken that step backward, you would hope that this movie would have spurred a similar trajectory where we would have gotten stories sooner where they don't even bother. They don't need, or they recognize their flaws of still othering, you know, different people than you and making them the bad guy.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So that said,
one of the...
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say one of the other things that I wrote in this movie is that I feel like the movie is constantly trying to get a pass on their writing of like people who are Muslim and people of Arabic descent, because they condemn bigotry explicitly in the text of the movie. And they also make like one of the main good guys of somebody who's of Arab descent as well. And I don't think that really excuses people from from their actions, and you can't be like, well, I was good intention and I did these couple of good things, so I don't have any sort of fault that I need to be held accountable for. And I think that that's kind of a thing that I see just across a lot of different people and a lot of different groups and everything, and on different media sources. And I think that it's still important to say, nah, you did let people down in these ways. And we are going to say plenty of good things about this movie later, I think. But I think it's also important to acknowledge the ways in which they fell short.
Totally. So let's mention some of those things that we did like. I thought Denzel Washington played a really compelling FBI agent and is a great protagonist in this movie. I enjoyed Annette Bening's performance. I felt like some of the time I was a little unsure of kind of where she was coming from, and I expected her to have a much more involvement in kind of the twist, either to be behind some things or in relation to other things, or things happen to her. I felt like I never really quite understood why she was acting the way she was acting. But outside of her kind of manic moments where she's just telling people to do stuff without any reason, I enjoyed her performance. I enjoyed the scene where they're in that bar and everyone starts dancing for some reason. And then Tony Shalhoub, always love him. He's great to watch.
Oh yeah.
This is probably his least comedic I've seen him. Really no sense of comedy in this role from him, but
yeah,
I enjoyed his performance.
Yeah, I've never seen Tony Shalhoub in something where I went, wow, Tony Shalhoub was bad in this. Even in like Spy Kids, where he plays like a fucking thumb guy or whatever, he's fantastic. He's so good. I love him in Monk, and in a certain sci-fi parody movie, he is also amazing. The Galaxy Questing, if you will. And what else was he? Oh, and he's recently been in The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and he is also really good in that.
Yes,
so
I agree.
Yeah, Tony's the man. We'll also get to him later, but I thought that our old Brucey boy did a pretty good job too.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I have some
the stars were great.
Some plot questions about him particularly, but we can wait because I was a little confused as to what was going on, but we'll get to that when we talk about Bruce in general. Let's talk about the set pieces a little bit.
Okay.
So there are several moments in this movie where there are active hostage/bomb scenes, some of which are harmless and people, no one dies. Many of which people do get injured and die. Again, I think post 9/11, this all sits differently with me. But then I remembered that, again, there was very prominent bombings not that much previous to this movie coming out. And I feel like it would have been extremely unsettling to watch. There's a scene where a movie or a Broadway theater is bombed, and you see a woman walk out and then turn to the side, and she's like missing her arm. And that was extremely shocking. You had not seen, there had been very little violence, like graphic violence, and I think there had been one shootout scene, but otherwise most of the violence had been kind of muted and shown at a distance, like the bomb explosions and stuff. So that was quite shocking and quite unsettling.
Yeah.
What did you think about the set pieces?
Yeah, I actually had to pause this movie because I was just getting... I'm a very empathetic person naturally, and I was getting a little bit overwhelmed watching it with all of the bombings, and the movie's pacing is pretty relentless once it gets going. So I thought that was also pretty just stressful for me to watch. I found myself really exhausted after getting done watching the movie because of all of the big set pieces and stuff like that. And so there's some problems that I had with the story as far as like characters and stuff go. I didn't really understand a lot of the motivations, and a lot of the characters were maybe better on screen because of the great actors behind them and less so because of the script. But whenever it came to the pacing of the movie, I didn't have any complaints at all. It moved along at a very brisk pace, and it happened in a pretty relentless fashion. So you don't really have much time to comprehend everything as it's all happening, except for after a certain bombing that becomes very personal for some of the main characters. That scene, I felt like you really did get to kind of sit with them as they dealt with it. And right after the Broadway bombing, and actually that bus bombing too, you get those like moments of quiet where you just contemplate and you watch the characters contemplate, and I really liked those moments for sure.
Yeah, after the bus bombing, Denzel is he loses his hearing, and he's kind of just sitting there, and the movie is muted, and slowly like the ringing and the sound kind of return, and I thought that was it helped kind of ease you into how shocking of a moment it just was. But you're right. I think you said it well when you said this movie is relentless, especially in the final third when the quote unquote siege happens. I kept waiting, and I was like, there's no sieging in this movie. It's just like tracking down a terrorist cell. And then in the final third of the movie, basically the army rolls in and places Brooklyn under siege.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there on out, it is just nonstop rough times.
Yeah. Yeah, that was pretty brutal for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to think of other major things to bring up about this movie.
I had something that I definitely wanted to talk about for sure. It's a pretty big topic, though, so I don't know if you had any other small things you wanted to get to before
I think
that.
That's the smallest stuff.
Okay. One of the things that I definitely wanted to talk about with the movie was this movie where I had at the beginning kind of teased out how I thought that the movie was going to be super pro-American and stuff like that. The movie kind of doesn't do what a lot of these other movies do or what you would expect it to do and make like Bruce Willis the like good guy general sort of character, because Bruce Willis doesn't play that. And he and the military the army under his command do some pretty heinous things. And the movie actually takes the time to go ahead and condemn those things, and it asks the viewer to do so as well. And I did find that it was kind of overly simplistic in its depiction of it. Like, oh, this is a bad dude, and that's why these bad things are happening. Whereas like the desire for national security above all else, and the like rampant imperialism that the U.S. practices are some of the big reasons why I say that we would do the things that we do, we being Americans. But in this movie, there were a few different things that I wanted to kind of call out that drew attention to that. There's a torture sequence that takes place in a bathroom, and the bathroom has a bunch of like beige and yellow tones and stuff like that. And I immediately picked up on how striking the resemblance was to the pictures that had come out about the way that the U.S. was interrogating prisoners that were held in Abu Ghraib, I think is how you pronounce it, in Iraq. Those photos where they're extremely graphic. So if you're going to go look them up, just be forewarned. But there's some pretty horrible stuff that's going on in those photos, but they take place in a similar looking environment. And the fact that there was a torture sequence in an environment that looked like that was very, very shocking to see, especially taking place several years before that had happened. And the movie definitely takes the time to go ahead and condemn that and shows Denzel's character grappling with how he can support a country that would do something like that, and how he then like vows to take it down, or take down Bruce Willis. as we know, it's not just a Bruce Willis out there that's torturing people and doing non-judicial killings, aka murdering. It's more complicated than that, and it's a more widespread issue, and it's not something that can be fixed by just a character getting behind bars at the end of a movie. But I was impressed by how this movie was at least trying to tackle that issue. And there were some other things too that were along that, but if you had anything that you wanted to add to that, definitely go ahead.
Yeah, that was a great point to bring up. This kind of falls into that bucket where I was mentioning earlier of I was confused about a lot of plot purposes for things, and I felt like this movie again just didn't know how to take a stance against some of these things that it seemed to want to take a stance against. And if it had gone fully in the camp of, look at the evils of American, injustice, here's some examples, I think that would have at least made this a lot clearer. I think we're seeing a lot of terrible things, both not only in the stuff you've mentioned, but the whole story is kicked off when Bruce Willis kidnaps the Sheik from Iraq, I believe, at the beginning of the movie, and no one knows about it. No one in the Senate knows about it. It's just kind of Bruce Willis acting on his own accord. And the president, we're led to believe via archive footage, is Bill Clinton, who was the president when this movie came out. But I think, I don't know if it was for story reasons that they wanted us to believe Bruce Willis was doing it on his own, or if it was basically like the president was telling him to do things and not going through the regular chain of command. Because of the fact they used a real president, it's not like they could have a scene where Bill Clinton is telling Bruce Willis, go do this thing. So again, I was really unclear as to what the motivation was behind all this stuff, and was he acting under orders or was he just going rogue? I'm not really sure. I was talking with my wife after we watched this movie, and I mentioned that what we've learned in the last 20 plus years since this movie came out is that this kind of stuff does happen, but the FBI usually just is like, okay, cool, fill out this form and we'll talk to you later. This still has the classic American Hollywood-esque storytelling of there's a good cop in there and he'll win at the end.
Whereas it's like a little bit more complicated, and it's oftentimes the institutions themselves that enable the sort of rampant corruption that covers up for people doing heinous things like this.
I was really surprised that we're never shown the director of the CIA or the FBI, which both of, Annette Bening's character is the CIA and Denzel's the FBI. We're never shown their bosses calling them and saying, hey, you got to stop this. Like even that 10-second scene would have at least led some credibility of being, oh, the agencies are in on this because the government knows what's going on. We're just kind of assuming that everything, like they're the good guys here, which I'm not sure if that's the point of the movie, or maybe I'm just reading too much into it. But I think, we've talked a lot about on this podcast about, police portrayals in movies and all this stuff kind of feeding like a propaganda of how we view authority figures. So, it's something we've repeated a lot, but those things really stuck out to me. Kind of like, why wasn't anyone, why were there no chains of command conversations happening if they really thought they were doing the right thing?
Yeah. To which I would respond that I don't think this movie knew that it wanted to make a statement like that, or was even aware of that, because I feel like that's something that I've only become aware of in the last few years, and people who pay more attention to politics, especially foreign politics, have known about for a while. But the fact that all the agencies kind of know about crimes that are being committed by other agencies and then turn a blind eye to them it's pretty commonplace. So I just think that as we become more aware of it, there's going to be more accountability. And I would say that it's less, like individual agents who are ratting out their organizations and more, actually, no, it's probably a little bit of that and probably some just amazing journalism finds and stuff like that. But
yeah, for sure. I go back to that quote in that Roger Ebert review. I'm not arguing The Siege is a deliberately offensive movie. It's not that brainy. I kind of get, like, the more we talk about this, I think more, and I don't know, I haven't read any interviews or anything, so I can't speak to this, but like, with proof, but I don't think this movie was trying to make a message as much as it just wanted a twist ending. And so instead of being a paint by numbers, the terrorists are the bad guys, they threw in it's actually this, American general who's also a bad guy. I think that's about as far as they kind of thought the story through, and they didn't sit down and kind of think about the ramifications of that story and its accuracies at all. And
yeah. In my review on Letterboxd about the movie, I kind of mused that maybe the movie was a little bit too bogged down politically to kind of make it as like an action movie back when it was released. And now the movie has a lot of things that are politically incorrect or bad. And so there's only like a very limited time, like post 9/11, where this movie could even hope to be a success before the really like oorah, like pro war on terror kind of American propaganda crept in. I'd say like mid 2002 onward.
And, we've been pretty hard in this movie for deserved reasons, but it is a fairly exciting movie. I think its biggest problems, other than the offensiveness kind of, removal from the plot, it was offensive at the time, obviously, because it was being picketed. It wasn't as if they didn't know that it wasn't going to be offensive. But it's just a convoluted plot, I think, if you ignore the content and you just look at the movie without that offensiveness, in mind, there's a lot of convoluted moments that I think really deterred people from seeing it, even if they weren't thinking about this kind of stuff we're talking about. Particularly the political stuff, like you talked about. There's several scenes in Senate chambers with a lot of different senators asking a lot of questions, and Denzel gives up and gives some testimony, and we're never really sure as to what's going on and who's who, and it's almost 2 hours. But with all that said, I was pretty engrossed for those 2 hours. There's a lot of excitement, a lot of spycraft and 90s era action movie. It is an action movie through and through, and a lot of the action moments worked for me. I could feel the terror as the U.S. Army kind of rolls through the city. There's a scene where Bruce Willis describes it's during a Senate hearing, and they're asking him if they should bring the army into New York to hunt these terrorist cells, and Bruce Willis kind of describes what will happen and how terrifying it is. And I thought that was a great way to describe it. And he says, like, U.S. Army is not a police force. And some of the senators are like, but we've made you one overseas. And I feel like that alone, that is worth stopping. And having someone have a discussion about, like, no, I don't think they should be used overseas. And they're not better police officers overseas than they are here. And
to our own people,
they're pretty terrible here in New York. So they, you could be led to believe they're pretty terrible in Haiti or whatever his example was that he brings up.
But it's kind of interesting how much this movie reveals, I think, without intending to. Maybe there was somebody on there who was like a bleeding heart lefty was just trying to sneak in all these lines into the dialogue about stuff where it's like, well, other nations have gotten pretty used to us being a police force. It's like just to kind of cut through that a little bit. But it is very, very heavy in a lot of these different aspects. I also found the Denzel character when at the very end of the movie, he's kind of going on that monologue, and it's in the trailer, so you might have heard it earlier, but where he's like, you know, we can't like shred our principles and try to lower our values and stuff and hope to beat the enemy. That's never going to work. We have to hold true to what we believe, and we have to respect the law and take other people, just like do things that are illegal, basically. And he goes on about this for a hot second, and he does a great little Denzel performance that is wonderful. He is so charismatic and very watchable in everything that he's in. But I found that to be maybe a little bit hollow because, like, not even 15 minutes into the movie, they're already violating different laws in regard to, like, interrogation and getting the letter from the judge. What is that? The
warrants.
A warrant, yeah. They like violate that. There's Tony Shalhoub's character like messes with some evidence so they can hold a guy. So like there's already shady stuff going on at the beginning of the movie, and then he draws the line at torture, which like I get that. Like I think that maybe all laws are not equally bad, and that's why there's different consequences for each of them. But it would make it a little bit more impactful if we had seen this character holding true to the letter of the law and being a good guy through and through, and not allowing shenanigans like that at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah. And not only that, but it's kind of commented on Annette Bening's like lack of like CIA breaking the law constantly. They're kidnapping people, interrogating people here in American soil without any jurisdiction, all this stuff. And he's pretty hard on them. He's like, you know, you have to have warrants. You have to do things by the book. You can't ignore the laws. But then when they just kind of, they're like, okay, well, you were kind of right, so we'll move on. Bruce Willis is doing it much worse than you, so we'll just ignore you.
Yeah.
I think we're looking too deeply into this, but.
And I knew that I was going to do that with this movie. And any movie that's like a political thriller and then becomes somehow more relevant now than when it was released is going to do that. But
for sure.
Yeah, I know that it wasn't the intention of the movie. And I think the people who go in and like give it a 5-star review because of how like subversive it is are probably reading extra things into it, which like, to be fair, I support the idea of death of the author and everything. So I think that films and media are more about what you take out of it than about what the author intended. But I think that you have to base that in the text. And the text of this movie is complicated, as we've already covered. And I think that it's really hard to say that they intended all these great, glorious things. There might have been good things that came out of this movie. I didn't mention it earlier, but there's also a scene in which Tony Shalhoub is rightfully so, just so frustrated with the internment camp situation that's going on, and he just reams Denzel's character about it, even though Denzel isn't the one that's in charge, and Denzel has to take it and then grapple with it, and that seems great. But I don't think that the filmmakers set out to make Denzel as a stand-in for America on purpose. I think that that's just something that happened because they were trying to write a story, and it ends up being really poignant, but it wasn't necessarily written that way.
Yeah, that scene was really powerful because he talks about, you know, his kid was born in America. Like, he was just a child. He works for the FBI. They showed him all their paperwork, and still they were just kind of pulled away. And again, just going back to like modern day analogs of this kind of stuff is happening today. People are being deported and ripped away from families. No one's double checking anything on top of policies being inhumane. I think no one thought they probably were just kind of referencing something that they never thought that we'd see as much. But yeah.
Yep.
Anyway,
yeah,
I think
totally.
we've picked and prodded this movie quite a bit. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we move on?
Nah, we've covered all the stuff that I was interested in talking about.
All right, let's talk about the Star Trek connection. So there's a handful here that I want to bring up. If you're first-time listener to the Willis Way podcast, Star Trek Connections are where we find a way to connect this movie to the Star Trek universe for reasons we don't yet know. We were just kind of told by future us to do this every podcast episode. So we've started doing it. And
yeah, all Bill and Ted, they came back in time to us, and they were like...
yeah. They sent us a podcast from the future and made us listen where we talk about this, and they were like, you got to keep doing it. And we were like, okay,
yeah.
I guess that's the case. So I want to first bring up Spice Williams Crosby. She is a stunt actor. She does stunts in both this movie and several Star Trek episodes. There were several people that did stunts, but I thought she had the coolest name, Spice Williams Crosby. So I want to call it her. Also, Dakin Matthews, I believe is how you pronounce his name. He played one of the senators in the siege in that scene inside the Senate.
Oh yeah,
committee hearing or whatever. He's one of the senators. I don't remember if he has any lines in particular, but he was an extra in several different episodes of Star Trek, several different Star Treks. He played different characters. One of the funny things to note about him, on his IMDb page, it says, from February 2014, Dakin is taking on the iconic role of Mickey, the grizzled No Mercy trainer in Rocky the Musical at Broadway's Winter Garden Theater. I was not aware that there's Rocky the Musical. So if those Rocky boys over at our Last of the Action Heroes family are out there and want to coordinate a trip to this theater and see Rocky the Musical, you know how to get a hold of me. I would gladly go see that. And finally...
yeah.
Go ahead.
No,
I
was
have one
gonna
more
say,
Star Trek connection.
Okay, I have another Broadway connection once we're done with this, because I wanted to shout out an actor, and I totally forgot about it, and you reminded me of it with that.
Okay.
But, yeah.
This may be our most controversial Star Trek connection. I'm not sure. I'll let you tell me what you think. But Bill Clinton is in this movie and in some episodes of Star Trek Enterprise, both using archive footage. So he falls in the category of Star Trek connection.
Against his own will.
Yeah. Against his own will, Riker. He fell into our trap of Star Trek connections. Because IMDb ranks connections by popularity, he just was like ding 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 way at the top, and I was like, what?
That's so good. I think if I ever get elected president, I will go ahead and record a handful of lines just of me as the president saying things that are genero enough to where they can put me into movies if they need to. I'll be like, America will not stand for this, and other things like that. So then they can use me, and then I'll be like, you can have this, but you have to pay me. And then make them go that way.
You just call up Paramount, please make a Star Trek episode where they go back to the 2040s or whatever, and I don't know when you're going to get elected, but I assume it'll be the 2040s. That sounds
sometime after the Bell riots for sure. So sometime after the next few years.
Good Star Trek call out. All right, what Broadway connection did you have for me?
Yeah, so I was watching this movie, and at one point when they do that Senate hearing or whatever, there's a guy who's got kind of a nasally voice, and I was going, oh my god, that guy, why does he sound so familiar? And I was just beating my head against my phone as I'm trying to remember what this guy's name is, scrolling through everything, and then I realize it's Chip Zien. And Chip Zien is famous for playing Howard the Duck in the Howard the Duck movie. And then he also, I know, he also played the baker on the original run of Into the Woods, and he is so good in that. So if you haven't seen Into the Woods, the original Broadway run, you can find a production that was filmed. It was like a 10-year anniversary show, and he is in it, and he is very good. I highly recommend it. So that was Josh's new one-off segment question mark. I'm not going to do this every episode probably question mark. Broadway connection.
Also want to shout out Lance Reddick, who plays one of the other FBI agents. He is in a lot of things, but most notably to me that I recognized was John Wick. He plays the hotel manager in the John Wick trilogy.
Did you also catch that one of the guys from Four Rooms was a cop in this movie?
I did.
David Proval.
Yeah, David Proval. I was like,
yeah.
Oh my gosh, what is that guy from? And then I looked at him and ding, ding, ding.
I know. I was like, Danny, I have to remember that name. Scrolling through IMDb, like trying to find it. Yeah. Lots and lots of actors in this movie. Lots of it's kind of a who's who of late '90s action movies.
Yeah, and a lot of those people we mentioned they have like 5 lines, if that.
Yeah, yeah, because it's mostly a Denzel movie, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
mostly.
For sure.
Okay, let's do box office numbers.
Sounds good. So this movie had a budget of $70 million, and it came back from the box office trip with $116.7 million. So that is a return of some amount that I have on my Excel spreadsheet, which I do not have up in front of me until this very moment.
The fonts are the wrong size.
Yeah, the fonts were the wrong size. No, but it's a return of 1.66. So not an amazing return. And typically, as we've said before, you want to have double because of like marketing and you want everybody to get paid and stuff like that. And that's when it's kind of considered a success. And this movie did not hit that, and it kind of went. Pfft. It might have done better on the DVD sales afterwards, as those executives claimed, but who's to say? Not me. It doesn't show that on Wikipedia. So I'll continue on living my life.
Oh, Joshua. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Bruce Willis's performance. We've talked around him a little bit. I thought he played kind of an ambiguous bad guy pretty well. I enjoyed. He seemed very ominous, and he's wearing a suit for most of the movie, which I was reading indicates that he was part of the cabinet because he wasn't wearing. You don't see him wearing his military uniforms, and a lot of times, if they're wearing suits in their official capacities instead of their military uniforms, it can be because they're part of the cabinet instead of acting military. I don't know how accurate that is, but
it sounds accurate.
He switches when the army comes to Brooklyn. He puts on his fatigues and becomes a military commander and maintains that kind of foreboding, ominous atmosphere. I thought pretty well. Also at the end when there's kind of the final showdown with him and Denzel, I was not sure how the movie was going to end because basically, Bruce Willis commands his entire group of soldiers standing around them to point their guns at these FBI agents. That was a stressful moment. So yeah, I really liked Bruce's performance here.
Yeah, same. I have in the most recent movies that we watched, I maybe wasn't that crazy about the Jackal, but I think everything else I've liked what he's put out. I haven't been disappointed with his performance. I have had many beeves with the movies, but his performance has been pretty decent, and that trend continues. I thought he did a good job.
Yeah, for sure. I'm unsure. So the plot discrepancies I was mentioning earlier, when they're in the Senate hearing and they're trying to get the army to come in, it seems like Bruce Willis is very against it. Like he doesn't want to go. Yeah. He's like, this is a bad idea. You don't want to do this. And yet when they give him the go ahead, he's like, fuck it. All right, here we go.
Yep.
Gonna roll up everybody's street, destroy everything.
Yep.
And I was like, well, this seems very different than the attitude you just had. So that was a little bit of kind of whiplash.
I think we're supposed to read that as like a Senator Palpatine versus Emperor Palpatine thing where he's like, if it is the will of the Galactic Senate to place this upon me, I will carry it. And then later he just becomes evil. I kind of took it as that, like he was evil the whole time and he's kind of pretending like he doesn't want the responsibility in order to be trusted with the responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely.
But that wasn't
evil
made super clear.
He's definitely evil, quote unquote. You know, evil, capital Eve, the whole time because he kidnaps that guy at the beginning and is just kind of like standing in the shadows, cackling. So I don't think that it was. I never thought that he necessarily, you know, became evil from the like New York powers, you know, setting foot on Brooklyn. He was like, "Oh, I love it here. I'm going to take it over." But if they were trying to portray him as someone who is sympathetic, saying, "No, don't send me in, don't send me in," they overdid it because I was completely convinced that he was actually resisting to going in.
Yeah. I expected him to have some bigger plan at the end.
So, like I said with Annette Bening, I thought the twist was going to be she was kind of behind the whole thing, and it was not really Islamic terrorists after all, and maybe Bruce Willis was aware of this. I don't know. I expected a lot more surprising twists at the end, and not just, yes, the Arabs were behind it, and Bruce Willis is also bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, if I could time travel back in time and write a review of any movie, this might be one of the ones I would think about. Yeah.
Okay, where would you rank this movie in our list of movies? This will be our 28th. Yeah, 28th movie reviewed.
So I have on my list, I rate every movie that I put on my list on Letterboxd, and Letterboxd allows you to give up to 5 stars out for a movie, and it allows half stars. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 movies on my Bruce Willis list that are 2.5 stars. So roughly a third of the movies that we've watched so far, I've given 2.5 stars to. I debated giving this movie 2.5 stars, and then I felt like, it's maybe a little bit better than that because of the stuff that it does well. So I think that if you're looking at it on the stuff that it does bad, it's like half star, very offensive. On the stuff that it does good, it's probably like 4 stars. It's a pretty like well-paced movie. There's some pretty interesting things that it has to say about America and our compromising of our values and stuff like that. And so I hesitated really a lot on where to put it, but I think I'm going to put it at number 8. And if I had given it 2 stars, I could have moved it all the way down to number 7 or number 16. So it could have varied a lot, but I'm going to put it at number 8, right behind In Country and right above North. Movies that I like for completely different reasons.
Nice, nice. I had a similar kind of difficulty placing this movie, although I came to a different conclusion than you. So This movie is probably going to go in the lower third for me. I was trying to determine if I liked this more or less than Striking Distance and Last Man Standing. And I think I liked it more than both of those. So that means I will put this movie at number 15.
Okay.
Right under North and right above Last Man Standing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's perfectly respectable. I had it at number 16 earlier today, and then I thought about it more, and I moved it up, and then I was like, God, am I making the right choice? And then ultimately, that's a conversation for me, myself, and no, that wasn't what I was going to say. I ruined my own fucking joke. That's a conversation for Bruce Willis, myself, and God. So, you know, we'll see where that goes.
You could have kept that joke going and just pretended like you think of yourself as God. So,
ay. I think I need some caffeine.
All right.
Cool. Well, thank you, everybody, for listening to everything that we just did right up until the Wheel of Willis. I definitely was reading this part originally, and that's my bad. Kendrick, I'm flipping over here through my calendar, and there's no notifications about what time it is. Do you have any notifications?
Josh, I just got a pigeon at my window with a note on it that said, "Look at my watch." Did you send that pigeon to me?
I did, yes.
Wow, that just worked out perfectly. I don't know how you timed
used
it, right?
5G pigeons, so it's a little bit faster.
Yeah, gotcha. You timed it perfectly because it got here just when we needed it. Just when I needed to review my watch. And do you know what my watch said?
What does it say?
It's time for the Wheel of Willis.
The Wheel of Willis.
Yeah.
Well,
time only comes once an episode.
It does. It's the most wonderful time of the episode. Yeah. Well, you know what we do every time we spin the Wheel of Willis?
We say the same thing.
In sync, we always say,
"Whisk that wheel!" Has the wheel been whisked?
It has been whisked, and since I'm on a new browser, it now has sounds again.
Ooh.
Oh, goody. Oh, goody. Okay. So, Kendrick, if the Star Trek Connection was playing his Star Trek character instead, would this movie be any different?
So no for Bill Clinton.
Bill Clinton.
That's funny. Spice Williams Crosby, probably no. I'm going to look up at some of the examples of Doc and Matthews extras here on Memory Alpha. This is a good one. Say, Josh, do you know who sent us this one?
No, I don't.
I love asking you because you're never going to know.
I'm never going to know. It's so sad.
Nobody's going to know.
Oh, he was in he was in Voyager. What?
So he was Admiral Patterson. So I feel like if he was an admiral of Starfleet instead of a senator, he'd probably be doing a similar, something similar, right?
Oh, most assuredly.
He'd be, involved in decision making and probably unaware of kind of like the corruption above him.
Mm-hmm.
He's the admiral who gave Catherine Janeway the USS Voyager at the beginning of Star Trek Voyager.
Yeah, and as we know, Star Trek doesn't have any problems with corruption or people covering up those corrupt organizations at all or anything like that.
Yeah, they are up and up. Up.
Yep.
Up on the up and up. They're up and up.
Exactly.
There's some kind of up. They like watching the movie Up.
It's true.
All right. Well, thanks, listener, who sent us that Wheel of Willis Way suggestion. If you want to send us some suggestions of your own or additional suggestions that we promise to remember who sent them, you can shoot us an email, williswaypod@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter @williswaypod for all kind of jokes that we make about Bruce Willis.
Ay,
indeed.
For every episode, we are trying to end it with a sweet little tasty treat.
Yeah, like a little closing gift that we say.
A little closing gift.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, exactly. It's a little reward, a loot box, if you will, at the end of the episode.
You grinded this whole episode, so we're going to give you some points.
Exactly. You all get 5 listener points, plus a sweet treat. Kendrick, what's your sweet treat for this episode?
So my sweet treat for this episode is a comic book series that I have been reading for quite a while. It is quite long. It is the Fables comic book series. It is created and written by a guy named Bill Willingham. It's published by DC's Vertigo, and it has a whole bunch of artists that have kind of worked on it over the years. The basic premise is there's all these alternate realities where characters from our modern day fairy tales and fables come from, and they had to flee kind of a war, and so they come here and they disguise themselves as humans. And so you have the Big Bad Wolf as a main character. He's the sheriff, and you have other characters, Little Red Riding Hood, Prince Charming, all this stuff. All these people are living kind of in New York. And when I started it, it was kind of like a classic comic book story about, fairy tales, but a little bit twisted. And it quickly grew into like one of the greatest graphic novel comic book series I've ever read. It is extremely deep, really takes a spin on a lot of the fairy tales that we're familiar with, and kind of, deepens them and adds interest and flavor, and find it super interesting. So again, that's the Fables comic book series. How about you, Josh? What do you got?
Oh, I was going to ask, where could we find that if we were interested in reading that?
Oh, I have been reading it from my library. It's probably, if you go to any comic book store and you ask them for Fables, they can probably order you the first issue. It is released in trade paperbacks of collected issues. That's how I've been reading it. But like I said, it is quite long. It has been going on since 2002 and fairly regular. With
nice.
like many major arcs and kind of subplots and stuff going on. So,
wow. All right.
If you're familiar with the video game The Wolf Among Us, which was popular a few years ago, that is based on a Fables comic book.
Wow. I have definitely heard of that. I just have not heard of this comic book series. So that's really exciting. Thank you for pitching that.
Yeah.
My little sweet treat that I wanted to give to you guys was another podcast that I've been listening to. Kendrick, I'm so sorry, but our podcast isn't my only podcast. I've been podcastily unfaithful. I know. I'm so sorry. But yeah, I've been listening to a podcast that's been put out by Christianity Today called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill.
It was a really heavy day.
Did I pledge my allegiance?
Why are we not looking at the deep-seated reasons for this?
For the purpose of progress.
Mark just came and said, if you plant a church, he's going to tear it down brick by brick.
To a priest or a prophet.
We have a culture of church members who would prefer a narcissist leading a church.
Playing God in the process.
How dare you! Who in the hell do you think you are?
Was I chasing convenience?
There's very real chronic trauma that comes from serving within systems like this.
There's a few guys that if I wasn't going to end up on CNN, I would go Old Testament on them.
A lot of pastors get fired. Driscoll got fired for being an asshole.
Who do you think you are?
From Christianity Today, this is Mike Cosper, and you're listening to The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. It's the story of one church that grew from a handful of people to a movement and then collapsed almost overnight.
And it's talking about the Mars Hill Church, which was started up in Seattle by Mark Driscoll and a couple other people, and about like how the church kind of got started and personality issues that arose and stuff like that. Mark is a pretty famous figure within certain evangelical circles, and he is, I'm pretty sure, an undiagnosed narcissist. And so the show is remarkably triggering if you have any narcissist people that are in your life. Just a forewarning. And especially if you have sensitivities to spiritual abuse, it is pretty rough at times, although the show isn't meant to be overly hard to listen to or anything like that. It isn't extreme in its depictions of anything. It's pretty matter of fact, cut and dry, but just the fact that it is so cut and dry makes some of that even more hard to listen to, I'd say. But it has been phenomenal so far. I've really appreciated getting a pretty in-depth breakdown of a lot of the different stuff that was going on and how screwed up it was.
Thanks for that. That sounds awesome. You said that. Say that podcast again.
It's the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill Church, and the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, and that's available anywhere that you can find podcasts. So if you already got the Where There's a Willis, There's a Way Apple Podcast link open, you can look at the little search bar and then type in the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill Church after you leave us a review. Please note, you do have to leave us a review in order to be able to go find out about this other podcast. It's a prerequisite.
Yeah, Apple's changed their rules recently, and that's one of them, and I don't know why, but
Yep, it's true. It's true.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this episode of Where There's a Willis, There's a Way. You can find me on Twitter at KMartinix. Josh?
And you can find me on Twitter at Joshing Carter.
Next week.
Oh, no, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Next time, we're covering the sequel to The Fifth Element, which is the sequel to Four Rooms. We're going to be covering...
And the prequel to The Lucky Number 11.
And... yeah, I got nothing else. We're going to be covering Sixth Sense. Super excited to talk about that. I just saw Old recently in movie theaters. The new M. Night Shyamalan.
I thought it was the old M. Night Shyamalan.
Sorry, I just turned into a ghost and disappeared because of how bad that joke was. Thanks, everybody. Have a good time. Day.
Yay. Goodbye.
Bye.
Oh, yes, it's fun time. Fun time. Fun time. Fun time. Let yourself be happy. It's fun time. Shake time. Shake time. Break time. Break time. It's fun time. You all know.
Ay, ay, ay.